Good evening. We'll now call the zoning subcommittee meeting to order, please. Madam Clerk?
Councilor Broderick?
Here?
Councilor Elliott?
Here.
Councilor Martin?
Here.
Councilor Murphy? 3 yeas, 1 absent.
Thank you. And as you all know, we're here for the purpose of reviewing the potential and need for rezoning, this, I guess, citywide, and starting with the, I think it was TFF, and I don't know if there's any specific questions. This has to do with the A&R process and what the city can do to prevent I guess, development as we had over in Livingston Ave. So if there's no questions from the fellow members, I'll turn it over to Councilor Caulfield.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the subcommittee for convening this meeting and for Adam Backey to be here as well. I think we're all disturbed and upset about the building on Livingston Avenue. It's 19 feet wide, over 80 feet long, and as we speak, the contractor's up there banging nails into lumber. And I don't even know if the sills on the foundation are tied down with anchor bolts, whatever. But it's disturbing that that house received a permit. Legally, they said you have to give them the building permit. My problem, Mr. Chairman, is it doesn't meet the character of the neighborhood, and it doesn't meet the aesthetics of that neighborhood, or any neighborhood. And I would like the subcommittee to take a long, hard look at the frontage. It's 55 feet of frontage now. I'd like to see that amended to 65 feet, and that would certainly help defray any more buildings such as the one on Livingston Avenue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Caulfield. Councilor Murphy's here, and we'll give him a minute to get settled. Councilor Martin?
Thank you. Just to follow up on Councilor Caulfield's comments, I think, he said the building, it doesn't fit with the character or the aesthetics of the neighborhood. And I know when we undertook the last rezoning and there was extensive surveying work of the neighborhoods, I think that was the number one complaint that we had, was what I guess planners and sometimes us refer to as infill development, where there's a extra lot that could be split off here or there. And often, developments are put in that just don't fit with the construction pattern of an existing neighborhood. And that was the most common complaint when we undertook the rezoning. We did implement a number of changes in '03, including site plan review for a much larger number of projects. You can't, I don't think state law would allow us to have site plan review for every single family construction lot. But we have it now for many more developments than we used to have it for. And we've made strides. We did increase dimensional requirements then. I think a lot of the lots that required 6,000 feet went to 7,000 feet. The point on frontage, I think, is a good one that maybe we could revisit, at least within certain districts. But I think, we don't hear as many of these complaints as we did the pre-zoning reform that was undertaken. And I think some of us said at the time it was not going to be a perfect process. We're going to see the need for further revisions, and as time has gone on, we have made further revisions, and I think this is another opportunity for us to revisit some of the requirements and come up with yet another set of revisions. So I'm anxious to hear what the planners and Mr. Backey have to say, but I think we all share the same concern and goal that Councilor Caulfield articulated. So appreciate those comments.
All right, thank you. I think at this point, Mr. Backey, I think it probably makes sense maybe for you to give us, and folks at home mainly, a quick refresher on the A&R and the difficulties in terms of from the planning side and how to prevent these types of infill projects. There's mention of changing the frontage and addressing the character and these things. So I know that you and your staff have spent a number of hours on this and trying to come up with a plan, and that you want to try and now continue forward. And if you could maybe give us a quick refresher on the A&R itself and what the limitations are from where you're sitting, and then let us know what you've come up with, and we can talk about how to go forward. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, and good evening, everyone. I guess even before I start with the discussion of the A&R process, I do want to caution everyone that, I guess, against two things. One, as Councilor Martin indicated, a tremendous amount has been improved as a result of the changes that this City Council adopted in 2003 and 2004 to zoning. It is, I guess, fortunate, maybe unfortunate, that you never really hear about the projects that don't happen. We don't have any outcry about the projects that can't happen because the zoning doesn't allow them to happen. And an awful lot that changed in 2004 prevented an awful lot of things that we would have been hearing about if the zoning had not been changed. So while I definitely appreciate the opportunity to work with the council to continue to improve the process and improve the zoning so that we can continue to move toward having even fewer of these situations, I do want to just make sure that everyone does appreciate the work that has been done so far. And again, it's very hard to measure and it's very hard to acknowledge, but it should be acknowledged that there was a tremendous amount of improvement as a result of the zoning that's already been adopted. The second caveat, which kind of goes the other direction, is that I don't believe that there is any magic bullet solution. It is very difficult to neighborhood character is a clear objective and a consensus objective, but it's a very difficult objective to define without a certain amount of subjectivity. One person's definition of what is an attractive building and another person's definition may not be the same, and one person's definition of what their neighborhood character is may not match even their adjacent neighbor's definition. So it's difficult to achieve something that everyone will agree with. It is equally difficult to get to the A&R question. It is equally difficult to get to a solution locally that would completely eliminate the possibility of development under the A&R statute. The A&R process is a product of the subdivision control law, which was adopted in the 1950s by the state legislature. And essentially what it is it's the exception. It is a listing of the things that the legislature at that time felt did not merit subdivision control, did not rise to the level of something that municipalities should be given the authority by the state to regulate. These were the things that they felt did not rise to the level of requiring a public hearing and so forth. So when they wrote the subdivision control law, they excluded a number of things from it, hence the term approval not required, or A&R. These were the things they said that approval under the subdivision control law should not need to be required. And a number of them are things that I think even today everyone would agree approval should not be required. Things like when you have a very large lot and so does your neighbor, and you want to swap a little bit of your backyard because they want to have a bigger yard to have a pool or something like that. That doesn't affect zoning compliance in either case and doesn't really affect anything for anybody but you and your neighbor. There didn't necessarily need to be a whole elaborate public hearing process for that, and the legislature exempted that sort of thing. One of the other things they exempted, which is the one that does cause a lot of consternation and is why we're here this evening, is projects where the property proposed to be subdivided has a substantial amount of frontage along an existing road. And therefore, if it has more than twice the frontage that is required under the zoning code, then municipalities are required to allow that property to be divided into as many lots as they have frontage along the existing road for, without a public hearing process, without any kind of discretionary review. And that, I think, gets to the core issues that came to the fore with the property on Livingston Avenue. And those are that this could be done at all, but even more importantly, that this could be done with so little public notice or public communication. And that there was so little local control over what the outcome might actually be. And in reviewing these A&R proposals, the city is actually limited and restricted to only be able to look at frontage. It's the only zoning dimension that we can look at when someone comes in with an A&R proposal. If a property, if an A&R plan shows every lot having sufficient frontage, even if they are woefully and obviously inadequate in other respects, we have to endorse it as a subdivision. And we have to endorse it in a manner that does not include a public hearing. And ultimately, the catch on that is that when someone does come and then apply for a building permit, we then can have a full zoning compliance look at the lot that's been created, as well as the lot from which it was divided. And we can make sure before we will issue a building permit that they meet other zoning characteristics. But at that point, the subdivision is long over. There's actually a case that's pending, a permit application that's pending before the city right now on another property in the Highlands, which the A&R subdivision occurred in 2000. And only now are they submitting the building permit application. And there are some questions about whether it's compliant and whether the lot that remained was compliant. And we're looking at that at this point before any permit will be issued. But the point is, the A&R process gave them that subdivision 11 years ago. And it's been subdivided all of that time, and there's been no ability for the municipality to address that. Now, because of that, I don't think we can come up with a situation where I can say to you, if you do this, there will never be another A&R plan in Lowell. There will never be a case where neighbors are unhappy with a new development. What I can suggest is an approach that will minimize the likelihood of that and will minimize and mitigate against the adverse effects of the A&R process. And I think there are two main adverse effects of it. One is the lack of public notice, and the second is really the lack of any kind of discretionary review, particularly focused on sort of design and character issues. And what we are looking at is a proposal where we would essentially divide the frontage requirement that we presently have as a single number that is the minimum frontage. And if you meet that, again, under an A&R plan, you're entitled to the endorsement, into a two-tiered system where we would increase the frontage, the minimum frontage required by right in virtually every residential district in the city. And I don't think it's particular to any one. I think the districts are actually aligned fairly well with the existing character of their neighborhoods in terms of dimensions. So if one is a problem in some cases, there are probably similar cases or opportunities in other districts as well. So I think it would be unwise to single out a single zoning district. This is something we should really look at in all of the zoning districts that govern the established residential neighborhoods in the city. So we would propose to increase the by right frontage. And at this point, we're doing some analysis, and I have Aaron Ladd from my staff here, who's actually been doing a lot of the analysis for us, trying to gauge the effects of different numbers so that we can come to you with a good, solid recommendation about what those numbers should be. But we would then create a second tier of frontage, which would actually be lower, probably not unlike the current frontage requirements. However, in order to access that, in order to have a permittable, buildable lot, you would need to go to the zoning board for a special permit. And you would need to have a design review process. And essentially, the design review process would ensure a certain amount of architectural integrity and quality. And then the zoning board process would ensure that there is a public hearing, there is public notice, and there is public involvement. And we believe the result of that would be for the abutters who are concerned about these kinds of projects, the increased by right frontage would severely limit the number of properties where something could occur simply under an A&R plan with no notice and no participation. But the special permit process would allow owners of property and proponents of projects an opportunity to make a case that they could potentially build something that is consistent with neighborhood character at dimensions that are similar to some of the existing properties in the neighborhood. But they would have to make that case. They would have to make that case to a design review process, either the historic board if it's a historic district, or probably the planning and development's design planners if it's not in a historic district. And they would have to make that case to the neighbors and the zoning board at a public hearing. If they succeeded in doing so, they would then have the ability to build, and it wouldn't change. Those who have made investments in property based on what they think is possible today might still have an avenue as long as they're doing something of quality. But if they're not, we have a process in place to prevent that from happening. And if it's something where the abutters really feel it would be an inconsistent or inappropriate project, their voice will be heard, and presumably the zoning board would respect that, or the planning board. We have to look at some evaluation as to which would be the more appropriate board. Typically, the zoning board hears most special permit cases. The planning board hears most subdivision cases, so it's a bit of a toss-up as to which is more appropriate, and we can certainly work with the subcommittee on that topic as well. So that's the extent of our thinking at this point. Again, we are doing some analysis. The initial information I can provide is that the extent of the potential for A&R subdivision in the city, if we make no changes to zoning, is less than 1.5% of the lots in the city. And some of those are ones where it is quite likely that if there were any kind of development, it would be in a much more substantial manner that would require public hearings and review for other reasons. Only a smaller number of those are ones like the Livingston Avenue situation. Even fairly modest changes to the frontage dimension would cause at least half of those to move into the category of requiring some kind of special permit. So I think we could really have a significant effect, but again, I must caution to say we cannot eliminate the possibility altogether of a project happening that somebody may be disappointed by.
Thank you, Mr. Becky. I have just probably a couple of quick questions, and then, well, other folks are looking at their notes here. What would be the difference between the special permit process under changes versus what it is now? In other words, don't we now have the minimum frontage and a special permit process? Would it be, I guess my question is, would it be different than what it is now?
We certainly have plenty of things that one can apply for a special permit for today, but we do not have anything like this with respect to frontage. The effect of this would be essentially to increase the frontage requirements that one would have to rely on to submit approval not required plans, but at the same time retain an avenue where if someone is proposing, again, a quality project that is welcomed by the neighborhood, they would have an avenue other than a variance, which has a very difficult standard to meet under the state law, to at least have the opportunity to make their case and see if indeed the community and the abutters and the appropriate board agreed with it.
Okay, so basically, this is not available now to get a special permit for frontage.
Right,
But
that's correct.
We would make it available citywide, but bump up the approval not required.
Exactly.
And, well, I guess I can wait and see what you come up with. As I say, I assume you would make the special permit number at least what it is now and bump up the approval not required.
I think that's exactly the thinking.
Okay. Thank you, and again, thank you for your work, and appreciate the efforts here and look forward to hearing more. Anyone else? Councilor Martin?
A few questions. So you said there's 1.5% of the lots, existing lots in the city, roughly, that are available to be further subdivided. Is that, how did you, I know it's a little easier than it used to be with GIS and things, but.
It's easier and it's harder.
Right.
It's easier to look at some of the basic dimensions like the lot area and the frontage and see which ones have the potential for division. And doing that type of a very elementary process identified about again, less than 1.5% of the lots that have the potential for that kind of division. However, it becomes very quickly a very subjective process, because you look at one example of a lot that ended up on our list to get to that is 305 Dutton Street, the apartment complex on Dutton Street. And it is possible someone could file an A&R plan for that property, and essentially, in that case, what they would likely be doing is dividing the building that's undeveloped along the canal in the back from the larger mill building. That is an A&R. That is a property that has A&R potential. But that really isn't the kind of property that results in this type of discussion. So there's a lot of those types of properties included. There are other properties, like a couple of the large remaining undeveloped lots in Pawtucketville, which would very likely be a much more substantial subdivision proposal under subdivision control, because it is possible to divide them into 2 or 3 lots using A&R, but it's potentially possible to divide them into 5 or 6 lots if you go through the subdivision process. So while, again, they fall on the list of technically possible, they're ones that are unlikely to be just an A&R development. That's the reason, that's what makes it very difficult to pin down a number and actually definitively say what is or isn't possible. But what we can feel pretty confident about is that a change, again, even with only a fairly modest change to the by right minimum frontage requirement, we could probably reduce by at least half the number of cases that are similar to the Livingston Avenue situation that are possible in the city.
Well, I'm intrigued by the approach. I think it's creative, and I commend the thinking that went into it. Do we know if this has been tried anywhere else?
Actually don't know if it has.
Okay, so this is our own in-house approach to this, which I think...
We may be pioneers or guinea pigs, I'm not sure which.
Right. And then I think I know the answer to this, but if you could refresh my memory. On an A&R plan, my memory is that doesn't give you any grandfathering protection on dimensional, just use. Is that right?
That is correct. If you file an approval not required plan, it protects you for a period of, I believe, 3 years as to use. So if you're in a mixed-use district that allows commercial development as well as residential, you file an A&R plan to create a lot, and then the council makes a decision to rezone that area to solely residential, that particular property will retain the right to do commercial uses for that period of 3 years. And this change really wouldn't affect those grandfathering rights, but it would affect, again, the number of properties that potentially could benefit from the A&R process.
But as to lots that have already been subdivided, they met the requirement at the time, and those are probably good building lots, or no?
That's actually a more complicated question, as I think you know. There are also provisions of the State Zoning Act that allow certain lots that are not owned in common with neighboring properties under certain statutory minimum dimensions, which again, the city has no control over, to be buildable even if the city changes dimensions. So I wouldn't rely on this type of a change to have a dramatic effect on vacant lots that have already been created as to their buildability. Some are buildable, some are not. But I do think this would reduce the likelihood of new buildable lots being created, again, without a public process.
I didn't have 40A Section 6 in mind when I asked that question, but a whole parade of horribles in the back of my head have been brought to the front of my head. So, you're right, it is a very complex area to regulate around. So, thank you.
Councilor Elliott?
So can I follow up on Council Martin's point, or maybe an earlier statement, that while there is no magic, no silver bullet, because of subdivisions or pieces of property that already have been subdivided, or they're going to meet the requirements of an approval not required, we still potentially could have some developments that took place on Livingston Street?
Well, I would hope that we will minimize the likelihood of developments that result in the level of widespread opposition that we saw in that particular case. But I would be remiss to stand here and tell you and promise you that there's a change we could make that will eliminate the possibility altogether, because I don't think that is possible. I just, to add a personal aspect to the story, the property directly across the street from where I live in the Highlands was subdivided a couple of years ago by A&R. No one has yet built on the vacant lot that was created as a result of that, but it's not likely, because of some of the aspects of the State Zoning Act that provide certain protections, it's not likely that a change like this would affect the buildability of that property. And so it is, I would hope that that's a case where, if designed well, it would fit in with the neighborhood and not necessarily result in the same adverse reaction that we saw on Livingston Avenue. But there will be cases, again, like that, any change we make, because again, the State Zoning Act provides for grandfathering protections, essentially, in certain cases.
Well, look, I want to echo sentiments earlier, because I happened to be here when we did go through the rezoning exercise in 2003. And at that time, and while I agree, we'll never be able to measure or realize the impact that those changes did have when something like this comes up. And I think it is unfortunate, because prior to 2003, it seemed week after week, there was a complaint from some neighborhood, some street, about developments that were going in, primarily multifamily condominium units, and we have seen we haven't seen any of those types of developments, and I think that's a very positive attribute. But knowing that as soon as, well, not as soon as, it's been quite a number of years since we did a complete revamp of the zoning code, but since that time, this seems to be one of the few problem developments, if you will, that has crept up, and as we have probably all mentioned, as quickly as we change and put amendments and provisions in place to prevent poor developments, I know it's all a matter of opinion, developers find a way to construct homes, to sneak them into particular zoning areas. So it's good to hear that. I think we all knew there was no magic, there's no magic wand that we could wave to stop this, something like this. But at least it is a creative way, it seems, to look at the frontage, and that is where the problem lies, as you evaluated, and to come up with a solution in that manner, as well as the public notification process. I think if we had heard anything through the Livingston street development from the neighbors, was the fact that, and in many developments, quite frankly, that this is done, it seems, in the middle of the night. Nobody knows anything until there's a bulldozer digging a hole and there's a foundation coming. So knowing that we're looking at a public review and public notification process, I think that goes a long way to put measures in place to prevent this. Not prevent, I won't say prevent, but limiting the exposure. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Elliott. Councilor Murphy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize if it was covered at the start of the meeting, but could you speak to the process of how you will involve the 1.5% that will be affected by any kind of changes, how you reach that kind of balance necessary, and are able to come up with that frontage, minimum frontage number?
Sure. There are a couple of pieces of the answer to that question. The notification requirements for a zoning amendment are such that you don't necessarily send a piece of mail to everyone whose property might be affected. So you do advertise. Obviously, there's both formal and informal advertising processes. There are at least 2 public hearings required for these for any kind of a zoning amendment. So there's definitely opportunity for the public to be aware of changes that are being proposed. But it is also true that without getting that particular piece of mail in a direct addressed specifically to you, it's not always easy for folks who are busy to be aware of changes. And part of that is part of the reason why we're proposing, rather than just a carte blanche increase in the frontage, this 2-tiered approach where there remains an opportunity, again, for people to prove who have made a choice to acquire a piece of property for whatever reasons, to have an avenue where they can retain the options that exist to them today, as long as they can prove with a public process that it is a quality project. So we're not necessarily taking away rights that people thought they had who own property, but we are taking away the right to do something without any kind of public involvement or public hearing or any kind of review to ensure quality. That's sort of the reason for thinking of this as a 2-tiered process, as opposed to, again, just changing the rules across the board. And I think that goes a long way to balancing the concern that changes like this may happen with some people who might be affected by it not being aware of it. But similarly, the folks who are abutters to some of these sites aren't necessarily going to be aware of this change either, even if their interests may indeed be served by it. And the hope again is that we're coming up with a proposal that can serve their interests while also serving the interests of the property owners, or retaining some rights for the existing property owners.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Councilor
I
Elliott.
just had one more question. Have you seen applications, building permit applications, in the last couple of months since the Livingston Street debacle that would sort of raise eyebrows that, it's an approval not required?
Well, it's very difficult to, again, evaluate what the standard is for raising eyebrows, as you say. I'm sure everybody has a different standard. We have, I believe, 2 projects that are in stages of the permitting process right now that involve lots that were created by the approval not required process. One of them, the approval not required plan, as I said, was approved in 2000. I think the other one was approved in something like 2008. And at this point, they're only now coming to consider building on the lots that were created. I'm not aware at the moment of any other pending applications that involve A&R lots. I do think that both of those instances, I believe both of those instances, as with Livingston Avenue, if this proposed change had been in place, probably would not have been endorsed as A&R plans. Again, one of them dates back 11 years. So that was a zoning of quite a while ago that created that one. But so I think it would help. This is not, while it clearly is a situation that those who are directly affected by it had a very strong visceral reaction to, and I can appreciate that, and I'm very sensitive to that. It is not, I don't believe, a widespread problem throughout the city where there is a large amount of this kind of activity happening throughout the city. That said, again, it still is in our interest to mitigate against even one of these cases.
So as you mentioned, these lots were subdivided, one in 2000 and the other in 2008. They've just, they've just sat there waiting to be developed. Is it in a traditional single family, or is it the suburban single family, or the?
Honestly, I actually don't know that answer to
Okay.
that question. This one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Caulfield, again?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and once again, thank you for convening this meeting. As we all know, land is a premium in the city of Lowell. It's scarce. And you have good developers, and you have developers who aren't. in the best interest of the people. They're just in the best interest of themselves. And I agree with Adam Bakey 100%. The zoning subcommittee in 2003, 2004, had they not amended some of the zoning changes, we would have had catastrophes in our city. But the city sets the guidelines. The city set the guidelines of 55 feet of frontage. Livingston Avenue, there was 4 inches to spare, 55 feet, 4 inches. And I strongly, and Adam will disagree with me, suggested that permit should have never been handed out. It didn't fit in the character of the neighborhood aesthetically and so forth. But I do like what Adam indicated, that increase the frontage. If we increase the frontage, that building on Livingston Avenue wouldn't exist, wouldn't have happened. And I like the fact that the neighborhood is going to be involved in some way, somehow, with a public notice, a public involvement, a public hearing, and let the people who we represent, let the people know that we're there representing them and not the best interests of the developer. And I drove by Livingston Avenue tonight on my way down here, and the lumber is there, and they're putting up this building that resembles a garage. It's absolutely horrendous. And the people who live on Livingston Avenue, they're going to have to look at that forever. Forever. I'm just going to drive by and see it, but they're going to have to look out their window and look at that building forever. So any way we can improve the frontage and make it more compatible to the neighborhood, the character of the neighborhood, I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with building in the city. Good construction, good development. But that on Livingston Avenue is a disgrace, a total disgrace, and I sympathize with Mr. O'Brien, the Burns family, and everyone who has to look at that forever. But thank you, Adam, for your comments, and I think they're wonderful.
Thank you, Councilor Caulfield. I guess before we wrap up, just to recap, Adam, it sounds like you have some more work to do in trying to implement this and find we're hoping is the best number to adjust up for the approval not required piece. And although we may not be able to prevent everything, it sounds like that things that would be approved now, approval not required, just automatically approved, will at least now have a public hearing and go to either the zoning board or the planning board, depending on what seems to be the better fit. And I think that's all people want, really, is that public hearing to be able to understand what's going on and an opportunity to prevent something from what they perceive to be ruining their neighborhood. In this situation, I think it's true. It is very detrimental, but to me, that takes care of the problem. I don't think we want to stop all development, but I think we want to have in certain situations, more control. And I commend you and your staff. I think this, whether you're a pioneer or not in this area, I think this is a tremendous use of the code here and a great idea. So I look forward to hearing more. And I can't stress enough, I think this is a great solution to what has become more and more of a problem. I mean, let's face it, they're not making any more land. People are going to become more creative in ways to make money and develop. So I think that this gives discretion where we now decide we want it. It wasn't decided this way years ago, but it's becoming tighter and tighter and tighter. So I think it's a great idea. It doesn't halt things, but it gives some discretion and public notice. And again, I can't commend you enough and your staff, whoever, I'm not going to ask you, but for whoever came up with this scheme here, this idea. So with that, if there's no one else to speak, I'll entertain a motion to, I think, recess. Yes, actually, thank you, Councilor Martin. Does anybody want to step up and be heard? Henry? All right. No one else? Do we have a motion to, I think, maybe recess and we'll reconvene upon more numbers?
So, just in terms of process, will you be coming back with these recommendations once you do a little bit more research, a little bit more analysis on, yes, this is what we should be doing, this is maybe one of two options, one of three options? Is that what we can expect?
Certainly. I believe within maybe, say, 2 to 4 weeks, we ought to have done enough analysis to have a sense of what maybe the right ballpark in
Range,
terms of the
right.
numbers might be.
Okay.
And we could either bring a proposal into the full council, or we could bring a proposal into this body and have a discussion about finalizing that before it becomes an ordinance. Really, that's up to you all about which way you'd like to handle it. But I certainly think on about that timeline, we could be ready to have an ordinance proposal.
Excellent. Do we have a motion to recess? Councilor Martin, seconded. Councilor Elliott. All those in favor? Chair votes yes. Thank you very much. And Adam and your staff, thank you. Tremendous work again.